Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Detective Ray Morrison had seen enough darkness in his 15 years with the NYPD to know when something was wrong. But nothing had prepared him for the quiet unraveling of his own home. At 42, Ray was a man who believed in absolutes: right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, justice and consequence. His steel-gray eyes and weathered face told the story of someone who'd stared down killers and never blinked first. When he'd married Claire Hartwell 8 months ago, Ray thought he'd finally found his anchor. Claire, 34 with auburn hair and emerald eyes, worked as a real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. She was successful, charming, and came with 5-year-old Emma, a quiet, thoughtful child with her mother's green eyes and blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold. Ray had embraced fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else. His own father had abandoned him when he was 7, leaving him with a mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep them afloat. He'd sworn never to be that man, never to let a child feel unwanted or unsafe. The Morrison family had seemed perfect from the outside. Ray had bought a house in Westchester County, a 4-bedroom colonial with a white picket fence and a tire swing in the backyard. Claire had insisted on the neighborhood, claiming it was perfect for Emma's development. Ray had agreed, despite the hour-long commute to the precinct. But perfection, Ray had learned, was often just a mask for something rotten underneath. The first sign came 3 weeks after they'd moved in. Emma, who had been a cheerful, talkative child during their courtship, had grown increasingly withdrawn. She barely touched her meals, pushing food around her plate while offering polite apologies. "Sorry, Dad, I'm not hungry," became her nightly refrain. Ray noticed how she flinched when adults approached too quickly, how she developed dark circles under her eyes despite going to bed early. When he brought up his concerns to Claire, she dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "She's adjusting, Ray. Moving is traumatic for children. She'll get used to it." But Ray's instincts, honed by years of reading people's lies and fears, told him otherwise. He began paying closer attention to the patterns in their household, the subtle dynamics he'd initially missed. Claire had been working longer hours lately, often taking calls late at night and stepping outside to talk. She'd grown distant in their bedroom, claiming exhaustion from showing properties to demanding clients. When Ray suggested family activities, she'd find excuses: work commitments, social obligations, Emma's supposed need for routine. Meanwhile, Emma continued to fade before his eyes. The vibrant child who used to ask him about his cases and beg for bedtime stories had become a ghost in her own home. Ray's partner, Detective Luis Santos, had noticed a change in him too. They were sitting in their unmarked car outside a suspect's apartment when Luis finally spoke up. "You look like hell, Morrison. What's eating you?" Ray stared through the windshield at the gray October sky. "Just family stuff. Nothing I can't handle." "Family stuff, huh?" Luis, a father of 3, understood the weight behind those words. "You know, my Maria went through a phase when she was Emma's age. Stopped eating, had nightmares. Turned out a teacher at school was inappropriate." The words hit Ray like ice water. He'd been thinking like a husband, not like a detective. He'd been looking for obvious signs of abuse while missing the subtle indicators that something was deeply wrong in his stepdaughter's world. That evening, Ray watched Emma more carefully during dinner. The way she glanced nervously toward the front door when they heard cars pass. How she seemed to shrink into herself when Claire answered her phone. The careful way she chose her words, as if she were walking through a minefield. After Emma went to bed, Ray found Claire in their home office, typing furiously on her laptop. When she saw him, she quickly closed the screen. "Just finishing up some listing descriptions," she said, but her smile seemed forced. Ray nodded, but filed the behavior away. Years of interrogating suspects had taught him to catalog inconsistencies, to watch for tells that revealed deeper truths. Later that night, as Claire slept beside him, Ray stared at the ceiling and made a decision. Whatever was happening to Emma, whatever was causing her retreat into herself, he would find it. And when he did, there would be consequences. Ray Morrison was not a man who forgave betrayal. He'd learned that lesson early, watching his mother struggle to raise him alone while his father started a new family across town. He'd seen too many victims destroyed by people they trusted, too many families shattered by those who were supposed to protect them. If someone was hurting Emma, if someone was threatening the only family he'd ever truly wanted, they would learn why Ray Morrison had never lost an interrogation. The storm was coming. Ray could feel it in his bones. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Facade. Ray's investigation began with the methodical approach he used on all his cases. He started documenting Emma's behavior patterns, noting her reactions to different stimuli, mapping the timeline of her withdrawal against Claire's schedule changes. The breakthrough came when he decided to pick Emma up from school early one Tuesday afternoon. Claire had mentioned a late showing, so Ray thought he'd surprise Emma with ice cream and maybe get her to open up. But when he arrived at Meadowbrook Elementary, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. Emma wasn't there. According to the office, Claire had called that morning to say Emma was sick and wouldn't be attending. Ray's hand instinctively moved to his service weapon as a dozen scenarios flashed through his mind. He called Claire's number, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Hey, babe, just thought I'd pick up Emma early. Where are you guys?" There was a pause that lasted a heartbeat too long. "Oh, Ray, I forgot to tell you. Emma woke up with a fever this morning. We're at Dr. Patterson's office right now." "Which location?" Ray asked, already knowing she was lying. Dr. Patterson only had one office, and Ray had driven past it on his way to the school. The main one on Elm Street. You know how these appointments run long. Ray ended the call and immediately phoned Dr. Patterson's office. No appointments for Emma Morrison or Emma Hartwell. No calls from Claire. The rage that built in Ray's chest was cold and calculating. Someone was playing games with his family, and Claire was either a victim or a participant. Given her lies, he was beginning to suspect the latter. Ray used his police resources to trace Claire's cell phone. The GPS showed her at an address in Yonkers, a luxury apartment complex called Harbor View. Not showing a house, not at a doctor's office, an apartment building where she had no legitimate business. Instead of confronting her immediately, Ray made another decision that would define everything that followed. He called in a favor from his contact at the phone company and requested Claire's call logs for the past 3 months. What he found painted a picture that made him want to break something. Multiple daily calls to and from a number registered to Trevor Ashford. Ray ran the name through the system and found Trevor was 36, had a record for assault from 8 years ago, and currently worked as a contractor. More importantly, Trevor Ashford lived at Harbor View Apartments, Unit 4B. Ray sat in his car outside the complex, watching the building like he was on surveillance. At 3:47 p.m., Claire's black BMW pulled into the parking garage. She didn't emerge for 2 hours. When she finally came out, she was smoothing her hair and checking her appearance in her phone's camera. But what made Ray's trigger finger itch was what happened next. Emma emerged from the garage stairwell, walking slowly, her head down. Her clothes were different from what she'd worn to bed the night before. Ray followed them home from a distance, his mind racing through the implications. Claire was having an affair. That much was obvious. But Emma's presence changed everything. What kind of mother brought her 5-year-old daughter to her affair partner's apartment? And why did Emma look like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world? That evening at dinner, Ray decided to test the waters. "How was the doctor visit today?" he asked casually. Emma's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She glanced quickly at Claire, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "It was okay," Emma whispered. "What did Dr. Patterson say about your fever?" Another glance at Claire. He said, "I need more rest." Ray felt something break inside his chest. His 5-year-old stepdaughter was being coached to lie to him. Someone had turned this innocent child into an accomplice to her mother's deception. "That's good advice," Ray said softly. "You know, Em, if you ever feel sick or scared or confused about anything, you can always talk to me. That's what dads are for." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and returned to pushing food around her plate. After putting Emma to bed, Ray confronted Claire in their bedroom. "How was your showing today?" he asked, watching her face carefully. "Oh, it went well. Difficult clients, though. They had very specific requirements." She was undressing as she spoke, not meeting his eyes. What kind of property were they looking for? A 3-bedroom condo. Downtown area. You know how picky buyers can be. Every word was a lie. Ray could see it in her body language, hear it in the careful way she constructed each sentence. But more than that, he could smell another man's cologne on her clothes. Claire, Ray said quietly, is there anything you want to tell me? Anything at all? For a moment, her mask slipped. He saw fear flicker across her face before she regained control. I don't know what you mean, Ray. Is everything okay? You seem tense. Ray studied his wife's face, the woman he'd sworn to love and protect, who was now lying to him while involving his stepdaughter in God knew what kind of situation. Everything's fine, he said finally. Just tired from work. But as Claire fell asleep beside him, Ray stared into the darkness and began planning. He had enough experience with cheating spouses from his caseload to know how this typically played out. The affair would continue until Claire felt confident enough to ask for a divorce, probably with some story about incompatibility or his job being too demanding. What she didn't know was that Ray Morrison never walked away from a fight, and he never forgave betrayal. Claire had made the mistake of involving Emma in her deception, and that elevated this from a personal matter to something far more serious. Tomorrow, Ray would begin gathering evidence. Not for a divorce attorney. Ray had bigger plans than that. Plans that would ensure Claire and her lover understood the consequences of their choices. Some people learned the hard way that certain men should never be crossed. Chapter 3. The Child's Truth. The opportunity Ray had been waiting for came the following week when Claire announced she had to fly to Chicago for a real estate conference. Ray verified the story. There was indeed a conference, and Claire's agency had registered her. But given her recent pattern of deception, Ray suspected the trip had more to do with Trevor Ashford than professional development. I'll only be gone 3 days, Claire said, kissing Emma goodbye. Be good for Dad, okay? Emma nodded solemnly. But Ray noticed how she seemed to relax slightly as Claire's car disappeared down the street. For the first 2 days, Ray treated the time like a reconnaissance mission. He observed Emma without pressure, noting how her appetite improved slightly and how she seemed less jumpy around the house. She still wasn't the vibrant child he remembered from their early dating days, but she was marginally more at ease. On the second evening, Ray decided to take a calculated risk. After Emma's bath, he sat on the edge of her bed for their usual bedtime routine. Em, can I ask you something? He said gently. She nodded, clutching her stuffed elephant, a gift he'd given her for her 5th birthday. When you go places with Mom, do you always have fun? Emma's eyes darted away from his face. Sometimes. What about when you visit Mom's friend, the man at the tall building? The reaction was immediate and devastating. Emma's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. I don't want to go there anymore, Dad, she whispered. But Mom says I have to be quiet about it, or something bad will happen to you. Ray felt his heart shatter and his rage ignite simultaneously. He kept his voice gentle despite the fury building in his chest. Emma, sweetheart, nothing bad is going to happen to me. I'm a police officer, remember? It's my job to keep people safe. That includes you. But Mom said, what did Mom say exactly? Emma was sobbing now, her small body shaking with the weight of secrets she'd been forced to carry. She said the man doesn't like policemen, and if I told you about visiting him, he might hurt you. She said some men are dangerous when they get angry. Ray's vision went red for a moment. Claire had been using his own profession, his dedication to protecting others, as a weapon to silence Emma. She'd terrorized a 5-year-old into keeping secrets that were clearly causing the child distress. Emma, listen to me very carefully, Ray said, taking her small hands in his. No one is going to hurt me. And more importantly, no one is going to hurt you. I promise you that. But I don't like going there, Dad. The man is mean, and he says things that make Mom upset. And sometimes, Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Sometimes he gets really angry and throws things. Ray's hands clenched involuntarily, but he forced himself to remain calm. Has he ever thrown things at you or Mom? Not at me. But one time he threw a bottle and it broke near Mom's feet. There was glass everywhere. Mom told me to hide in the bathroom until he calmed down. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture that made Ray want to drive to Trevor Ashford's apartment and end this immediately. But he needed the full truth first. Emma, has anyone ever touched you in a way that made you uncomfortable? Or asked you to keep secrets about touching? No, Emma said quickly, and Ray believed her. But I heard Mom crying once, and when I asked her why, she said adults sometimes have to do things they don't want to do. Ray felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Claire wasn't just having an affair. She was subjecting herself and Emma to an abusive situation. Whether she was being coerced or had simply gotten in over her head with a dangerous man, the result was the same. Emma was being traumatized, and Claire was using threats to ensure the child's silence. Dad, Emma said suddenly, I need to tell you something. What is it, sweetheart? The man, he said something about you. He said you think you're so tough because you're a cop, but that cops can be hurt just like anyone else. He said it while he was looking at pictures on Mom's phone. Pictures of you. Ray's blood turned to ice. Trevor Ashford wasn't just Claire's affair partner. He was actively targeting Ray. This wasn't a simple case of infidelity. It was something far more dangerous. Emma, this is very important. When did he say this? Last week, when Mom took me there while you were at work. He was looking at pictures of you in your uniform, and he said other things too. Bad words I'm not supposed to say. Ray stood up abruptly, his mind racing. Trevor Ashford had his personal information, photos of him in uniform, and had made threats. Combined with his previous assault conviction, this painted the picture of someone potentially planning violence against a police officer. Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully, Ray said, kneeling back down to her level. You did exactly the right thing by telling me this. You're very brave, and I'm proud of you. Am I in trouble? No, baby. You're not in trouble at all. But I need to make some phone calls tonight to make sure everyone stays safe. Can you do me a favor and not tell Mom about our conversation when she comes home? Emma nodded, and Ray could see the relief in her eyes. The burden of keeping adult secrets was finally being lifted from her small shoulders. After Emma fell asleep, Ray sat in his home office and began making calls. First to his partner Luis, then to his lieutenant, and finally to a contact in the FBI who specialized in threats against law enforcement. By morning, Ray had a comprehensive plan in place. Trevor Ashford had made a critical mistake by threatening a police officer and involving a child in his schemes. What he'd intended as intimidation would become the foundation of his own destruction. Ray Morrison had spent his career putting dangerous men in cages. Now it was time to add another name to that list. But this time it was personal. This time, Ray wouldn't stop at an arrest and conviction. Trevor Ashford and Claire had traumatized Emma, threatened his family, and violated every trust they'd been given. They were about to learn that some men don't just seek justice, they become it. Chapter 4, The Investigation. Ray spent the next morning implementing a plan that would have made his narcotics division proud. Using his police connections and 15 years of investigative experience, he began building a comprehensive file on Trevor Ashford that went far beyond what a simple background check would reveal. His first call was to Detective Maria Rodriguez in the Domestic Violence Unit. Maria owed Ray a favor from a case where he'd helped her locate a suspect who'd been terrorizing his ex-wife. I need everything you can find on a Trevor Ashford, age 36, lives at Harbor View Apartments in Yonkers, Ray said, keeping his voice professional despite the personal nature of his request. This official business, Morrison? Let's call it proactive policing. I have reason to believe he might be involved in intimidating a law enforcement officer. That was all Maria needed to hear. Threats against cops were taken seriously by every department, and she promised to have a full workup by the end of the day. Ray's second call was to his contact at the phone company. Claire's call logs had shown the frequency of her communication with Trevor, but Ray needed location data and text message records. With a potential threat against an officer as justification, the warrant would be expedited. While waiting for those results, Ray decided to do some old-fashioned surveillance. He called in sick, something he hadn't done in 3 years, and positioned himself across from Harborview Apartments. What he observed over the next 6 hours confirmed his worst suspicions. Trevor Ashford was a man with a violent temper and no regard for others. Ray watched him verbally assault a delivery driver over a parking dispute, saw him kick a neighbor's dog for barking, and witnessed him throw a beer bottle at a group of teenagers who were skateboarding in the parking lot. But the most revealing moment came when a woman in her 30s arrived at the complex around 2 p.m. Ray recognized her from social media photos as Amanda Pierce, Trevor's ex-girlfriend. What happened next made Ray reach for his service weapon. The argument started in the parking lot and quickly escalated. Trevor grabbed Amanda's arm hard enough to leave marks, shook her violently, and then shoved her against her car. Ray was about to intervene when Amanda broke free and drove away, tears streaming down her face. Ray followed Amanda to a nearby coffee shop and approached her carefully. After identifying himself as a police officer, he explained that he'd witnessed the altercation and was concerned for her safety. "He's been like this for months," Amanda said, her voice shaking. "Getting worse and worse. I finally left him 2 weeks ago, but he won't leave me alone." "Has he ever threatened you specifically?" "Every day. He says if he can't have me, no one can. He's also been talking about some cop whose wife he's been sleeping with. Says he's going to show the cop what real power looks like." Ray felt his jaw clench. Did he mention the officer's name? "Morrison, I think. He's obsessed with proving he's tougher than some detective. It's sick, really. He's using that poor woman to get to her husband." The pieces were falling into place with crystal clarity. Trevor wasn't just having an affair with Claire. He was using her as a weapon against Ray. The relationship was part of a deliberate campaign to hurt and humiliate a police officer who had likely never even met him. "Amanda, I need you to file a formal complaint about the harassment and threats. Would you be willing to do that? Will it actually help? Or will it just make him angrier?" Ray met her eyes with the cold certainty of a man who'd made his decision. "I can guarantee you that Trevor Ashford will not be a problem for much longer." After taking Amanda's statement and ensuring she had Ray's direct number, he returned to his surveillance position. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria Rodriguez. "Call me ASAP. You're not going to believe what I found." Ray drove to a secluded parking lot and called Maria back. "Morrison, your boy Trevor Ashford is a piece of work. 3 domestic violence arrests in the past 5 years, but the charges were dropped each time because the women recanted their statements. Intimidation? Most likely. But here's the interesting part. I talked to one of the victims off the record. She says Trevor has a thing about cops. Apparently, his father was a police officer who abandoned the family when Trevor was young. Classic psychological profile of someone with authority issues." Ray felt a grim satisfaction. Trevor's targeting of him wasn't random. It was psychological warfare based on deep-seated father issues. "There's more," Maria continued. "I ran his financials. Trevor's been making a lot more money than his contractor business should generate. We're talking high-end purchases, luxury apartment rent, expensive gifts. Either he's the most successful handyman in New York, or he's got income he's not reporting. Drug dealing? That's what I'm thinking. And Morrison? If this guy is dealing and threatening cops, that makes him a federal problem. The FBI would love to take a crack at him." Ray thanked Maria and ended the call, his mind already moving to the next phase of his plan. Trevor Ashford wasn't just an abusive boyfriend or a homewrecker. He was a criminal who had made the fatal mistake of targeting the wrong cop's family. That evening, Ray received a call from Claire. "Hi, honey. How are things going with Emma?" "Fine," Ray said, keeping his voice neutral. "She's been asking about you." "That's sweet. Listen, the conference has been extended through tomorrow. One of the speakers canceled, so they've rearranged the schedule. I won't be home until late Friday night." Ray knew she was lying. There was no extended conference. He'd checked. Claire was spending an extra day with Trevor, probably thinking she was being clever about managing her double life. "That's too bad," Ray said. "Emma will be disappointed." "I know, but this is important for my career. You understand, right?" "Of course," Ray replied. "Take all the time you need." After hanging up, Ray looked at Emma, who was coloring at the kitchen table. She seemed lighter somehow, more like the child he remembered from before their world had become complicated. "Hey, Em," he said gently. "How would you like to spend tomorrow at work with Dad? I'll show you the police station." Emma's face lit up with genuine excitement for the first time in weeks. "Really? Can I see your badge and everything?" "Absolutely." And Em, after tomorrow, things are going to be different around here. Better different. Ray had one more day to finalize his plans. One more day before Claire returned and the real game began. Trevor Ashford had wanted to play with the cop's family, had wanted to prove his dominance over someone he saw as an authority figure. Tomorrow, Ray would show him exactly what kind of man he'd chosen to cross. Chapter 5. The Setup. Ray brought Emma to the precinct the next morning, introducing her to his colleagues and letting her explore the detective division under careful supervision. She was fascinated by everything: the computers, the evidence boards, the holding cells, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed like a normal, curious 5-year-old. While Emma was distracted by Detective Santos teaching her how to use the fingerprint scanner, Ray put the final pieces of his plan into motion. The warrant for Trevor's phone records had come through overnight, and the contents were explosive. Text messages between Trevor and Claire revealed the depth of their relationship, and, more importantly, Trevor's escalating threats toward Ray. "Your husband thinks he's so tough," one message read. "Wait until he finds out what's been happening in his own house." Another message was even more damning. "I'm going to destroy that cop's life piece by piece, starting with his precious little family." But the most chilling discovery was a series of photos Trevor had taken outside Ray's workplace, their home, and Emma's school. He'd been stalking the family for weeks, documenting their routines and gathering intelligence like he was planning an operation. Ray forwarded everything to FBI agent Sarah Chun, who specialized in crimes against law enforcement. Within 2 hours, she called him back. "Morrison, this is federal territory now. We're opening an investigation into Trevor Ashford for stalking a federal officer and conspiracy to commit crimes against a law enforcement family. What's the timeline? We can have surveillance in place by this afternoon and an arrest warrant by tomorrow morning." "But Morrison," Agent Chin paused, "we're also going to need to interview your wife. Her involvement in this situation is concerning." Ray had been expecting this. Claire's role in Trevor's campaign against him made her either a victim or a co-conspirator, and the evidence was starting to suggest the latter. "I understand. She'll be back in town tonight. We'll need her phone and laptop for analysis. If she's been knowingly participating in threats against you, she could face charges as well." Ray felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Claire had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. After lunch, Ray took Emma home and sat her down for a serious conversation. "Em, tomorrow some of my friends from work are going to come to the house to talk to Mom. They might ask you some questions too, just to make sure everyone is safe." "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. You're the hero in this story. You told me the truth when it was scary, and that's going to help keep everyone safe." "What about Mom?" Ray chose his words carefully. "Mom made some bad choices, Em. When adults make bad choices, sometimes there are consequences. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you'll always be safe and loved." Emma nodded solemnly, and Ray could see the intelligence in her green eyes. She understood more than most adults gave her credit for. That evening, Claire returned home with a kind of forced cheerfulness that immediately put Ray on alert. "I miss you both so much," she announced, hugging Emma and kissing Ray on the cheek. "The conference was amazing, but there's nothing like being home." Ray watched her performance with the detached observation of a detective studying a suspect. Every gesture seemed calculated, every word chosen for maximum effect. "How was Chicago?" he asked casually. "Oh, you know how these things are. Lots of networking, boring presentations. But I made some good connections for the agency." Ray nodded, knowing that Claire hadn't been to Chicago at all. Phone records showed her device had never left the New York area. "That's great, honey. I'm sure it'll pay off." During dinner, Claire seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone and jumping at small sounds. When Emma accidentally dropped her fork, Claire nearly spilled her wine. "Everything okay?" Ray asked. "Just tired from traveling. You know how airports can be." After putting Emma to bed, Claire immediately headed for the shower. While the water was running, Ray checked her purse and found a receipt from a restaurant in Yonkers dated the previous evening. Further confirmation that her Chicago story was fabricated. When Claire emerged from the bathroom, Ray was sitting on their bed with his hands folded. "Claire, we need to talk." She froze for a moment, then forced a smile. Of course. What's on your mind? I know about Trevor. The blood drained from Claire's face. For several seconds, she stood perfectly still, like a deer caught in headlights. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Ray's voice was quiet but filled with absolute certainty. I know about the apartment. I know about the lies. I know about the threats he's been making toward me and this family. Claire's mask finally slipped completely. She sank into the chair by their window, her hands shaking. Ray, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been using our daughter as cover for your affair? Can you explain why you've been helping a man stalk me and threaten my family? It's not like that. Claire's voice was desperate now. Trevor, he's not what I thought he was. I tried to end it, but he said he'd hurt you if I left him. He said he'd make Emma disappear. Ray studied his wife's face, looking for truth among the lies. When did you realize what kind of man he really was? Weeks ago, maybe months. But every time I tried to break it off, he'd show me pictures of you at work or photos of Emma at school. He said he could get to any of us whenever he wanted. And you thought the solution was to keep seeing him? To keep bringing Emma around him? Claire was crying now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. I didn't know what else to do. He said if I told you, he'd kill you. He has friends, Ray. Dangerous people. Ray felt a mixture of anger and pity. Claire had made terrible choices, but Trevor Ashford was a master manipulator who specialized in psychological control. Claire, tomorrow morning the FBI is going to arrest Trevor. They're also going to want to talk to you about your involvement in this situation. The FBI? Claire's face went white. Trevor made the mistake of threatening a police officer and stalking a federal agent's family. That's a federal crime. What's going to happen to me? Ray looked at his wife, the woman he'd loved, who had betrayed him and endangered Emma, and felt nothing but cold resolve. That depends on how much you cooperate with the investigation. And Claire? It depends on how much of this was fear and how much was choice. Claire spent the night on the couch, and Ray lay awake staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring justice for Trevor Ashford and consequences for Claire. But Ray's real work, his true revenge, was just beginning. Some people thought justice ended with arrests and convictions. Ray Morrison knew better. Real justice was comprehensive, personal, and permanent. Trevor Ashford and Claire were about to learn that truth the hard way. Chapter 6: The Arrest. Ray woke before dawn, his internal clock calibrated by years of early morning raids and surveillance operations. He made coffee, checked his weapon, and reviewed the final details of the operation that would begin in 3 hours. Agent Chun had assembled a team that included FBI tactical specialists, local SWAT, and detectives from the Domestic Violence Unit. Trevor Ashford will be taken into custody on federal charges of stalking a law enforcement officer, making threats against a federal agent, and conspiracy to commit violence against a law enforcement family. But Ray's personal investigation had uncovered something even more valuable than federal charges. Trevor's financial records, combined with surveillance footage from a traffic camera near Harborview Apartments, had connected him to a drug distribution network that the DEA had been investigating for 8 months. Trevor Ashford wasn't just a violent manipulator. He was a mid-level drug dealer with ties to organized crime. That discovery would make his arrest significantly more consequential and his eventual sentence much longer. Ray kissed Emma goodbye as she left for school, watched Claire's nervous performance over breakfast, and then called his lieutenant to confirm he'd be late for his shift. At 7:30 a.m., Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chun. Target confirmed at location. Moving in 5 minutes. Ray drove to a position 3 blocks from Harborview Apartments and waited. He wanted to be close enough to see justice delivered, but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability about his personal involvement. At 7:47 a.m., he watched federal agents and SWAT officers enter the building. 6 minutes later, Trevor Ashford was escorted out in handcuffs, shouting threats and profanities that could be heard from 2 blocks away. Ray felt a cold satisfaction watching the man who had terrorized his family being loaded into a federal transport van. But this arrest was only the beginning of Trevor's problems. After the arrest, Ray returned home to find Claire pacing frantically in their living room, her phone pressed to her ear. He's not answering, she said when she saw Ray. Something's wrong. Trevor was arrested this morning on federal charges, Ray said calmly. The FBI will want to speak with you this afternoon. Claire collapsed onto their couch, her face pale and her hands shaking. Ray, you have to understand, I never wanted any of this. I was trapped. Were you? Or did you make a choice to have an affair and then make additional choices to cover it up? It started innocently. Trevor was charming, attentive. You were working so many long hours, and I felt lonely. Ray sat across from his wife, studying her with the same cold analysis he brought to interrogating suspects. When did it stop being innocent, Claire? Why try to end it the first time? Trevor said he'd been watching you, learning your routines. He showed me photos of you leaving the precinct, pictures of Emma at school. He said cops die in the line of duty all the time, and accidents could be arranged. And your solution was to keep seeing him? I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he'd eventually lose interest and move on to someone else. Ray shook his head. Claire, you brought Emma into this. You used our daughter as cover for your affair and exposed her to a dangerous criminal. Claire was sobbing now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. I know it was wrong, but I was scared, Ray. I was terrified of what he might do to you, to Emma, to all of us. Ray felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger at the choices Claire had made. Fear might explain her initial compliance, but it didn't excuse months of deception and the trauma inflicted on Emma. The FBI will want to know everything, Ray said. Your cooperation will determine whether you face charges as an accessory. What kind of charges? Conspiracy to stalk a federal agent. Accessory to making threats against a law enforcement officer. Child endangerment. Ray's voice was clinical, professional. Trevor's phone records show you providing him with my schedule, information about Emma's school, details about our home security. Claire's face went white. I didn't know he was going to use it to hurt you. He said he just wanted to understand your life, so he could avoid causing problems. And you believe that? I wanted to believe it. I was desperate to find a way out that didn't end with someone getting hurt. At 2 p.m., Agent Chun arrived with 2 other federal agents and a detective from the district attorney's office. Ray watched from the kitchen as they interviewed Claire in their living room, documenting her involvement in Trevor's campaign against their family. The interview lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Agent Chun approached Ray privately. Your wife's cooperation has been valuable, she said. Trevor Ashford is looking at serious federal time. Minimum 15 years, possibly 25 with the drug charges. As for Claire, what's the recommendation? House arrest, pending trial. Then probation with mandatory counseling. The prosecutor is willing to consider a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Ashford. Ray nodded. It was better than Claire deserved, but it served justice and protected Emma from further trauma. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Ray sat with Claire in their living room for what he knew would be their final conversation as husband and wife. What happens now? Claire asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices, Ray said quietly. The federal charges, the divorce proceedings, the custody evaluation. Ray, please. I know I made terrible mistakes, but nothing. Ray's voice cut through her plea with absolute finality. You betrayed our marriage, endangered our daughter, and helped a criminal target my family. There are consequences for those actions. I was scared. So was Emma. Every night for months, that little girl was scared because of choices you made. She lost weight, couldn't sleep, and had to keep adult secrets that no child should carry. Claire was crying again, but Ray felt no sympathy. He'd spent his career seeing the damage that selfish choices inflicted on innocent people, and he'd never been more certain that justice required accountability. I'll fight for full custody of Emma, Ray continued. I'll ensure Trevor Ashford serves every day of his sentence. And Claire? I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you really are. Ray Morrison was a man who believed in consequences. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of rebuilding Emma's life and securing her future. Claire would face trial, probation, and the permanent consequences of her betrayal. Trevor Ashford would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison, where men who threatened law enforcement families received special attention from other inmates. Justice, Ray had learned, wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring that the innocent were protected and the guilty faced the full weight of their choices. Some people called it revenge. Ray called it responsibility. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. 3 months after Trevor's arrest, Ray sat in family court listening to Claire's attorney make a desperate plea for shared custody. The lawyer painted a picture of a woman who had made mistakes under duress, a mother who deserved a chance to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. Ray's attorney, Amanda Walsh, a formidable woman known for her aggressive tactics in high-stakes custody cases, had prepared a different narrative entirely. "Your Honor," Amanda said, rising to address the judge, "the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate choices that endangered a 5-year-old child. Mrs. Morrison didn't just have an affair, she actively participated in a criminal conspiracy that targeted her own family." The evidence Amanda presented was devastating. Phone records showing Claire had provided Trevor with Ray's work schedule. Text messages where Claire discussed Ray's weaknesses and how to get under his skin. Photos that Claire had taken of Ray in uniform and sent to Trevor without Ray's knowledge. But the most damaging evidence was Emma's own testimony, given in the judge's chambers with a child psychologist present. Emma described months of being taken to the mean man's house, being told to lie to Ray, and being warned that bad things would happen to her father if she told the truth. Judge Patricia Henley had presided over family court for 12 years, and Ray could see the anger in her eyes as she reviewed the case file. "Mrs. Morrison," the judge said, addressing Claire directly, "you used your 5-year-old daughter as an accessory to adultery and criminal conspiracy. You terrorized this child with threats about her stepfather's safety. You coached her to lie to a law enforcement officer who was trying to protect his family." Claire's attorney attempted to interject, but Judge Henley continued. "Furthermore, your cooperation with federal authorities appears to have been motivated by a self-preservation rather than genuine remorse. The psychological evaluation indicates you show minimal empathy for the trauma inflicted on your daughter." Ray watched Claire's face as the judge delivered her ruling. He felt no satisfaction in her devastation, only a cold certainty that justice was being served. "Full custody is awarded to Detective Morrison," Judge Henley announced. "Mrs. Morrison will have supervised visitation rights 1 day per month, contingent upon completion of mandatory psychological counseling and parenting classes." Claire's attorney immediately filed an appeal, but Ray knew it would fail. The evidence was too comprehensive, Emma's trauma too well documented. After the custody hearing, Ray took Emma out for ice cream to celebrate. She seemed lighter somehow, as if the official recognition of her father's protection had lifted a weight she'd been carrying for months. "Dad," Emma said as they sat in their favorite booth at Murphy's Diner, "are you going to get married again?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Would that bother you?" Emma considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. "Only if she's mean to you, or if she lies." Ray smiled at his daughter's simple wisdom. "Well, if I ever date anyone again, you'll be the first to meet her. And if you don't like her, that's it. No second dates. Promise. Promise." But Ray's focus wasn't on future relationships. It was on ensuring that Trevor Ashford and Claire faced complete consequences for their actions. Trevor's trial was scheduled for the following month, and Ray had been working behind the scenes to ensure the prosecution had everything they needed for a conviction. Trevor's public defender had attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but Ray had used his connections to ensure the prosecutor understood the full scope of Trevor's crimes. The stalking charges were just the beginning. Trevor was also facing federal drug trafficking charges, assault charges from his ex-girlfriend Amanda, and additional counts related to threatening a law enforcement family. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Ray testified about finding the evidence of stalking and threats. Amanda testified about Trevor's pattern of violence and control. Claire, honoring her plea agreement, testified about Trevor's escalating threats and his obsession with humiliating Ray. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Trevor's former associate in the drug trafficking operation. Marcus Fleming, facing his own federal charges, described Trevor's detailed plans to destroy that cop's life and his boast about using Claire to gather intelligence on Ray's vulnerabilities. Trevor was obsessed. Marcus testified. He said cops thought they were untouchable, and he was going to prove them wrong. He talked about the detective's wife and kid like they were chess pieces in some sick game. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Trevor Ashford was found guilty on all federal charges and sentenced to 28 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Ray attended the sentencing hearing and watched Trevor's face as Judge Michael Torres delivered the verdict. For the first time since this ordeal began, Trevor's arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow expression of a man who finally understood the consequences of his choices. "Mr. Ashford," Judge Torres said, "you targeted a law enforcement family with a deliberate intent to cause psychological and physical harm. You used manipulation and violence to control multiple victims. You showed no remorse for your actions and no consideration for the innocent child caught in your web of criminal behavior." Trevor's attorney attempted to argue for a reduced sentence, but Judge Torres was unmoved. "This court finds that Mr. Ashford represents a clear and ongoing danger to society, particularly to law enforcement personnel and their families. The maximum sentence is not only appropriate, but necessary to protect potential future victims." After the sentencing, Ray walked to his car with a sense of completion that he rarely felt after closing a case. Trevor Ashford would spend the rest of his productive life in federal prison, where his threats against law enforcement would make him a target for other inmates who wanted to curry favor with guards. Claire's criminal trial was scheduled for the following month, but her plea agreement would likely result in probation and community service. Ray had ensured that her real punishment would be social and professional. Word of her involvement in threatening a police family had spread through her real estate agency and their social circle. But Ray's most important victory was simpler and more profound. Emma was safe, happy, and healing. She was seeing a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, and her nightmares had stopped. She was eating normally again, laughing at appropriate times, and trusting Ray to protect her. Ray Morrison was a man who believed in justice, and justice had been served. Trevor Ashford and Claire had learned that some people should never be crossed, and some betrayals carried permanent consequences. The innocent had been protected. The guilty had been punished. Ray could sleep soundly knowing that his family was safe and his enemies were neutralized. Some people called it revenge. Ray called it responsibility, the obligation of strong men to protect those who couldn't protect themselves and to ensure that evil faced consequences. Chapter 8. The New Beginning. 6 months after Trevor's sentencing, Ray and Emma had settled into a new routine that felt more natural and peaceful than anything they'd experienced during the marriage to Claire. Emma was thriving in her new school. Ray had moved them to a house in a different district to create physical and psychological distance from their previous life. The new house was smaller, but felt more like home. Emma had helped pick out the paint colors for her room, and Ray had taught her to use basic tools so she could help with simple repairs. They cooked dinner together most nights, did homework at the kitchen table, and established bedtime routines that included both story time and honest conversations about their day. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Emma's therapist, had declared Emma's recovery remarkable and reduced their sessions to once monthly. Emma was sleeping through the night, her appetite had returned to normal, and she was making friends at her new school. "She's resilient," Dr. Martinez told Ray during one of their parent consultation sessions. "Children who have a strong, consistent adult in their life can recover from trauma much more effectively than those who don't. You've given her the security she needed to heal." Ray felt a quiet pride in Emma's recovery, but he also knew their work wasn't finished. Claire's monthly supervised visits were awkward affairs that left Emma confused and sometimes sad, but Dr. Martinez encouraged them to continue as long as Emma wasn't regressing. "She needs to understand that her mother's choices weren't her fault," Dr. Martinez explained. "And she needs to see that you're not preventing a relationship. You're just ensuring it's safe." The visits took place at a family services center under the supervision of a social worker. Claire brought gifts and made promises about future activities, but Emma remained politely distant. She'd grown wise beyond her years about the difference between words and actions. Ray's professional life had also evolved. His work on the Trevor Ashford case had earned him recognition from the FBI, and he'd been offered a position with a joint task force investigating crimes against law enforcement families. The job paid better, offered more regular hours, and allowed him to use his experience to help other families facing similar threats. His new partner, Detective Lisa Chun, Agent Chen's sister, coincidentally, was a former military investigator who brought a different perspective to their cases. She was also a single parent, which gave them common ground beyond their professional partnership. You know, Lisa said one afternoon as they reviewed case files, Emma's going to start asking questions about dating eventually. Have you thought about what you'll tell her? Ray had thought about it, actually. Emma was 8 now, mature for her age, and increasingly aware of family dynamics among her friends. I told her she gets veto power over anyone I might date seriously, Ray said. If she doesn't like them, that's it. Lisa laughed. That's either very wise or very limiting, depending on an 8-year-old's taste in women. Ray smiled. Emma's a good judge of character. She saw through Claire's act before I did. Speaking of Claire, how are those visits going? There. Ray paused, considering how to describe the uncomfortable monthly encounters. Necessary, I think. Emma needs to see that I'm not the one preventing a relationship. She needs to understand that some people just aren't capable of being good parents. Claire's life had indeed unraveled completely. Her real estate license had been suspended pending the outcome of her criminal case. Her social circle had ostracized her after learning about her involvement in threatening a police family. She'd moved back in with her parents in Ohio and was working at a call center while attending court-mandated counseling. Ray felt no satisfaction in Claire's downfall, but he felt no sympathy either. She'd made choices that endangered Emma, and consequences were the natural result of those choices. Trevor's situation was different. Ray received regular updates on Trevor's status in federal prison, and the reports confirmed his expectations. Trevor had been classified as a high-risk inmate due to his threats against law enforcement, which meant he spent most of his time in protective custody. But even protective custody couldn't shield him from the consequences of his actions. Other inmates who wanted to curry favor with guards, many of whom were former police officers, made Trevor's life miserable. He'd been assaulted twice, had his commissary privileges revoked multiple times, and was serving additional time in solitary confinement for various infractions. Ray had also used his connections to ensure that Trevor's parole hearing, scheduled for 15 years in the future, would be well documented with victim impact statements and detailed accounts of his crimes. Trevor Ashford would serve every day of his sentence. But Ray's focus had shifted from revenge to rebuilding. Emma was his priority now, and everything else was secondary. One evening, as they worked on Emma's science project about solar systems, she asked a question that caught Ray off guard. "Dad, do you think Mom loved me?" Ray set down the paintbrush he'd been using to help Emma color Jupiter and considered his answer carefully. "I think Mom loved the idea of you," he said finally. "But love means protecting people, even when it's hard. Love means telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Love means putting someone else's needs before your own." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like how you protect me?" "Exactly like that. Real love is about actions, not words. Do you think she'll ever learn how to love people the right way?" Ray looked at his daughter, wise, resilient, and thoughtful, and felt a surge of pride and protectiveness. "I don't know, but it doesn't matter what Mom learns or doesn't learn. What matters is that you know what real love looks like, so you can recognize it in other people and give it to the people who deserve it." Emma smiled and returned to painting Jupiter. "I think I already know what real love looks like." Ray Morrison had spent most of his adult life seeking justice for victims and consequences for criminals. But sitting at his kitchen table, helping his daughter with homework in a house they'd chosen together, he realized he'd found something more valuable than revenge. He'd found redemption, not for himself, but for Emma. He'd taken a traumatized child and given her security, honesty, and unconditional love. He'd shown her that some people could be trusted to keep their promises and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Some victories were measured in arrests and convictions. Others were measured in a child's laughter and peaceful sleep. Ray had achieved both, and that was justice enough. Chapter 9. Full Circle. 2 years later, Ray stood in the back of Emma's school auditorium watching her perform in the fifth-grade production of Annie. She played one of the orphans, and her clear voice rang out during the ensemble numbers with a confidence that still amazed him. After the performance, Emma ran to him with her face glowing with excitement. "Did you see me, Dad? Did I do okay?" "You were perfect," Ray said, lifting her up despite her protest that she was too old for that. "I'm so proud of you." As they walked to the car, Emma chattered about the other kids in the play, her upcoming science fair project, and her plans for the weekend. Ray listened with the contentment of a man who had fought for something precious and won. Dr. Martinez had officially concluded Emma's therapy 6 months earlier, declaring her a well-adjusted, resilient child with strong attachment bonds and excellent coping mechanisms. Emma still had monthly check-ins with the school counselor, but her trauma responses had virtually disappeared. Ray's own life had found a stable rhythm. His work with the task force was challenging but rewarding, and he developed a reputation as someone who could be trusted with sensitive cases involving law enforcement families. The irregular hours that had contributed to his marriage problems with Claire were now manageable, and he rarely worked weekends. Lisa Chun had become more than just a professional partner. Their friendship had evolved slowly and carefully, with Emma's approval at every step. Lisa understood the demands of single parenthood and the complexities of Ray's situation, as she'd never pushed for more than he was ready to give. "You know," Lisa had said recently, "Emma's been dropping some pretty heavy hints about me staying for dinner more often." Ray had laughed. "She's not exactly subtle, is she?" "Not even a little bit. Yesterday she told me I should teach her to braid hair because dads aren't good at girl stuff, and it would be nice to have someone who understands." Ray appreciated Lisa's patience with Emma's not-so-subtle matchmaking attempts. Emma had decided that Lisa was acceptable girlfriend material and had launched a campaign to encourage their relationship. Claire's monthly visits had dwindled to quarterly visits and then stopped altogether 8 months ago. She'd moved to California with a new boyfriend and had essentially abandoned her parental rights without formally relinquishing them. Emma had stopped asking about her mother and seemed relieved when the awkward visits ended. "I think she just wasn't meant to be a mom," Emma had said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of a 10-year-old. "Some people aren't good at important things." Ray had agreed and privately filed the paperwork to terminate Claire's parental rights due to abandonment. Emma deserved the security of knowing where she stood, and Ray deserved the legal protection of being her sole guardian. Trevor Ashford remained in federal prison with no possibility of parole for another 13 years. Ray received quarterly updates on his status, and the reports consistently showed a man who was broken by his circumstances. Trevor had been attacked multiple times by other inmates, had attempted suicide twice, and was currently serving additional time in solitary confinement for threatening a guard. Ray felt no satisfaction in Trevor's suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. Trevor had chosen to target an innocent family, and prison was simply the natural consequence of that choice. The real measure of Ray's success wasn't Trevor's misery or Claire's abandonment. It was Emma's thriving independence and growing confidence. She was an honor roll student, played soccer on the school team, and had a close circle of friends who often gathered at their house for study sessions and movie nights. "Dad," Emma said as they drove home from the play, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" Ray glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. "Would you want me to?" "Only if it's Lisa," Emma said firmly. "She's the only one who passes my tests." "What tests?" "She doesn't lie to you. She doesn't try to change you. She likes spending time with us, even when we're boring. And she laughs at your dumb jokes, even though they're not funny." Ray couldn't help but smile. "Those are good tests. So, are you going to ask her?" "Emma, relationships are complicated." "Dad," Emma's voice carried the exasperated tone of a child who thought adults were unnecessarily dense. "She brings you coffee the way you like it without being asked. She helped me with my math homework, even though it's not her job. She worries about you when you work late cases. She's already part of our family. You just need to make it official." Ray Morrison had faced down armed criminals, survived 3 officer-involved shootings, and successfully prosecuted some of the most dangerous men in New York. But his 10-year-old daughter's relationship advice made him nervous. I'll think about it, he said. Think fast, Emma replied. Good women don't wait around forever for scared men to figure out obvious things. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Ray sat on his back porch with a beer and considered his daughter's wisdom. Emma was right. Lisa had become part of their family through her actions, her consistency, and her genuine care for both of them. Ray had learned the hard way that trust was earned through daily choices, not grand gestures. Lisa had been earning his trust for 2 years, and Emma's trust even longer. Ray Morrison was a man who believed in consequences, both negative and positive. Claire and Trevor had faced the consequences of their betrayals. Emma had experienced the positive consequences of being protected and valued. Maybe it was time for Ray to embrace the positive consequences of letting someone trustworthy into his carefully guarded world. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Emma was amazing tonight. You should be proud. Ray smiled and typed back. Dinner tomorrow? I'll cook. I'll bring dessert. Lisa replied immediately. Ray Morrison had spent years ensuring that bad people face consequences for their actions. Now, surrounded by the quiet contentment of his rebuilt life, he was ready to embrace the consequences of choosing good people and treating them well. Some stories ended with revenge. Others ended with redemption. Ray had achieved both, and that was justice enough for any man. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.